Today we're going to be analyzing the life of King Nebuchadnezzar, specifically in regard to preaching. But before we even discuss Nebuchadnezzar, we're first going to establish why preaching is so important. There are many within mainstream Christianity who teach that it doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you're a good person. They teach that as long as you believe you're a good person and say that you believe in Jesus, you will be saved. This is not true at all. If it doesn't really matter what we believe, then how come there are so many passages warning us to beware of the false teachings that will arise and deceive many? Paul writes in 2 Timothy 4, verses 2-5, "Preach the word, be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage, with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers, to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you, keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry." This passage clearly proves that it does matter what we believe, and we must be extra careful not to follow the many false teachings of today. Paul also tells us here to be prepared to provide counter-arguments to false doctrines, to correct, rebuke, and encourage. Peter writes in 2 Peter 2, verses 1-3, "But there were also false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign Lord who bought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with fabricated stories. Their condemnation has long been hanging over them, and their destruction has not been sleeping." Notice how Peter says the false teachers that will arise will introduce destructive heresies. Their heretical teachings are destructive because they are bound to bring about destruction upon the teachers and those who follow them. Even in Revelation 13, we read of the beast that symbolizes the apostate Christianity that emerged from Rome. In Revelation 13, verse 8, we read, "All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world." So those who follow these apostate Christian teachings, we're told, do not have their names written in the Lamb's book of life. This makes it fully clear that belief absolutely matters for salvation, thus making preaching all the more important. Now that we've established that, let's now analyze the life of Nebuchadnezzar. We first hear of Nebuchadnezzar as the king of the mighty Babylonian Empire. His relationship with God was at first non-existent. However, God used him as he had used past rulers of foreign nations, as his chess piece to move about the board, to bring judgments upon sinful nations. Tyre, Egypt, and Judah being a few of the more notable examples. When we come to the book of Daniel, we start to learn about Nebuchadnezzar through Daniel's experiences with him. Daniel was taken captive by the Babylonians after the fall of Jerusalem. Alongside his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they were each given new names by Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel's new name was Belteshazzar, which means Baal protect the king. Hananiah's new name was Shadrach, which means command of Aku. Mishael's new name was Meshach, which means guest of a king. And Azariah's new name was Abednego, which means servant of Nabu. The meanings of these names tell us that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to get rid of the Jewish influence in their lives and immerse them in Babylonian culture. All of them, except Mishael, were given names related to honoring false gods of Babylon. This can be seen as Nebuchadnezzar essentially trying to remove Yahweh from the lives of these faithful men, which presents him as an enemy of God from the very first chapter in the book of Daniel. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah came into Nebuchadnezzar's service, as he found there were none equal to them in terms of wisdom, including all of the wise men of Babylon. Now, what's interesting about Nebuchadnezzar is instead of just using him to carry out judgments, God actually decides to work in his life, and he gives him a prophetic dream. When Daniel heard that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that troubled him, he requested to be brought to the king so he could interpret his dream, having received the gift of interpreting dreams from God. Daniel starts out by saying that it is God who reveals the dream's meanings to him and that he has no power on his own. This could have been the first time that Nebuchadnezzar truly heard about the God of Israel. Daniel then went on to tell him what the dream was. He says in Daniel 2, verses 31 to 35, "Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a mountain and filled the whole earth." Daniel then interprets the dream, stating how each piece of the statue is a successive kingdom that will arise after the previous one. The head of gold represents the Babylonian Empire, and the successive parts are the powers that would arise after and in place of Babylon. The stone that destroys the statue represents Jesus, who will put an end to the nations of the world and establish God's kingdom on earth when he returns. So Nebuchadnezzar was told that his empire wouldn't last and that the Babylonians would be overthrown by another empire, this being the Medo-Persians. The fascinating thing is his response to this revelation. He doesn't get angry at Daniel for telling him this. He doesn't harden his heart like the Pharaoh of the Exodus did, but he humbles himself in amazement, as verses 46 and 47 of Daniel 2 indicate, which read, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, 'Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery.'" Let's keep in mind that Nebuchadnezzar was one of the most prideful men to ever walk the planet. He was called King of Kings, as we see in Daniel 2, verse 37. He was the most successful king of the most successful empire at the time. Whenever he won a battle, he would glorify himself. But here, he is so amazed at God's power that he physically lowers himself to the ground and praises God, calling him the King of Kings and the God of gods. This was perhaps the first time in Nebuchadnezzar's reign where he showed genuine humility. When we get to chapter 3, we see that Nebuchadnezzar unfortunately went back to his idolatrous ways. He built a golden idol and commanded everyone to worship it. However, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow, and they stood by their faith in the one true God. Daniel 3:13 says that Nebuchadnezzar became furious with rage. He wasn't angry because he believed they had offended his idols. He was angry because they had defied his command. Nebuchadnezzar's rage exploded, and he had the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fire. Now notice Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to the miracle performed by God in Daniel 3, verses 24 to 30, which reads, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, 'Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?' They replied, 'Certainly, your majesty.' He said, 'Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods.' Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out.' Come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisers crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So God saved his servants from the fire, and Nebuchadnezzar's plan of killing them failed. But what's fascinating yet again is Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to this miraculous event. His anger was just as ferocious as the fire he made, but when he saw the three men unhurt with an angel by their side, he once again put away all of his fierce anger and pride and was in awe of God's power. He then told them to come out, and he started praising the Lord. From what we've gone over so far about Nebuchadnezzar, I think we can conclude that what separated him from many other leaders of foreign nations was that his amazement at God's divine power outweighed all of his tremendous pride. Whenever God showed him his power, whether it was through dreams or miracles, the mighty king of Babylon humbled himself and acknowledged God's greatness when he would have been the last person, perhaps in the whole world, expected to do so, making him a very unique figure. Daniel chapter 4, verses 1 through 18 seem to be written by Nebuchadnezzar himself, because it's written in the first person. The first 3 verses of the chapter say, "King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation." So here we can see that Nebuchadnezzar had this strong desire to learn about and preach God's word. However, this passion would wear out yet again, as the record goes on to tell us that he was given another dream. In the next dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees a large tree growing from the middle of the earth. Its tops touch the sky and could be seen from anywhere. The tree had beautiful leaves and produced an abundance of desirable fruit. Every animal benefited from the presence of this great tree. Then an angel came and commanded the tree to be cut down, its leaves and branches to be stripped, and its fruit to be scattered. The animals departed from it, and the tree's stump was bound to the ground with bronze and iron. The dream then shifts from describing the tree to describing man, and it says, "His mind would change from a human mind to that of an animal, and he would live like a beast in the field for 7 times, in order to show that God rules in the kingdoms of men." Daniel then interprets the dream and tells Nebuchadnezzar that his kingdom would be stripped from him because of his pride, and for 7 years he would lose his sanity and eat grass like the oxen. This was the worst news Nebuchadnezzar would have wanted to hear. However, Daniel says that the purpose of this is to make him realize that God is the one in control, and if he does acknowledge this, then his kingdom and prosperity would be restored to him. God kept trying to get Nebuchadnezzar to humble himself and understand that he's a mere mortal, so he could serve the Lord wholeheartedly. Sure enough, Nebuchadnezzar was exiled and given the mind of an ox. This humbling of Nebuchadnezzar is prophesied about in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 16 to 20, which read, "Those who see you stare at you. They ponder your fate. Is this the man who shook the earth and made kingdoms tremble? The man who overthrew its cities and would not let his captives go home? All the kings of the nations lie in state, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out of your tomb like a rejected branch. You are covered with the slain, with those pierced by the sword, those who descend to the stones of the pit. Like a corpse trampled underfoot, you will not join them in burial, for you have destroyed your land and killed your people. Let the offspring of the wicked never be mentioned again. So just as God exalted Nebuchadnezzar above all in the world to where he was hailed as the King of Kings, he brought him down to where he was equal to the oxen. And it was all in order to humble him, so he could serve the one true God and realize that man is nothing without him. God puts us through trials and tribulations in order to shape us into becoming better servants of him. Solomon writes in Proverbs 3, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in." At last, Nebuchadnezzar was finally humbled, and God's plan for him was fulfilled. In Daniel 4, verses 34 through 37, Nebuchadnezzar praises God as the everlasting, all-powerful creator of the universe. He finally fully acknowledges that man is nothing on our own, and God's ways are right and just. This passage is also told from Nebuchadnezzar's point of view, which means that he could have found such favor with God to where God honored him by allowing him to write a part of his holy book. This is the last we read about Nebuchadnezzar during his life, so it seems that he died upright in God's sight. Therefore, it is very possible that Nebuchadnezzar will be in the kingdom. Now imagine an Israelite who died at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, who was also blessed to receive a humble place in God's kingdom. Imagine how shocked they'd be to see Nebuchadnezzar there as well. He would forever serve as a reminder that even those who seem the most prideful, sinful, and corrupt can be saved. Now, how does Nebuchadnezzar's life relate to the importance of preaching? I believe we learn a lot about preaching from studying God's actions throughout the story. God didn't just give Nebuchadnezzar the one dream, then give up once he went back to his prideful, idolatrous ways. He kept trying to convert him. First, he gives him the dream of the statue, which represents the mighty powers that will be destroyed by God's everlasting kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar did humble himself after this dream was interpreted for him, but it was only temporary, as he eventually went back to his prideful ways. So God tried to convert him again by performing a miracle by having one of his angels save Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the blazing hot fire. Once again, Nebuchadnezzar only temporarily humbled himself. God then went even further and took away Nebuchadnezzar's throne from him and gave him the mind of an animal for 7 years so that he could finally fully acknowledge the one true God's authority. God never gave up on trying to convert Nebuchadnezzar. Likewise, neither should we give up on trying to convert those in the world. Jesus says in Luke 5, verse 31, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." If someone needs serious treatment, a doctor doesn't just do one thing for them and then never see them again. They continuously help them. Now, we cannot give people prophetic dreams or perform miracles for them like God can, but we can preach to them. We must do what we can, and God will take care of the rest. It would be naive of us that when we're preaching to those in the world, to only preach to them one time, then if they don't immediately convert, give up. Not only would that be naive, but it would completely go against God manifestation. Just as God never gave up on Nebuchadnezzar, neither should we give up on those in the world who we can reach out to. A large part of the mission that God gave his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, to fulfill during his first time on earth was to preach and be a fisher of men. Jesus bestowed that same responsibility to his followers, and we would be foolish not to uphold it. We must learn from the Lord and keep zealously preaching to non-believers as much as we can, so that hopefully, like Nebuchadnezzar, they too can be saved. We'll conclude now with a quote from Romans 10, verses 14 to 15. "How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news.